HttpSession Listeners. We have already seen the various HTTP session events in the previous lessons. Classes that implement the Servlet Context Listener and Servlet Context Attribute Listener interfaces respond to the changes in the servlet context, which is shared by all servlets and JSP pages in the web application. But with session tracking, data is stored in user-specific HTTP session objects, not in the servlet context. If you want to monitor changes to this user-specific data, what can we do? That's the function of the HTTP Session Listener and HTTP Session Attribute Listener interfaces. Now we are going to discuss about the HTTP Session Listener interfaces. The purpose of the HTTP Listener Session interface is to handle the session events. Let's see the interfaces we have to implement to handle these events. javax.servlet.http.http session listener, javax.servlet.http.http session attribute listener, javax.servlet.http.http session binding listener, javax.servlet.http.http session activation listener. Let's see the interfaces one by one. The javax.servlet.http.http session listener interface allows a listener class to receive the notifications if we made any changes to the session object in the web application. Let's take a look at the methods in this interface: session created and session destroyed. We are looking at the structure of these methods. Public void session created HTTP session event SE, public void session destroyed HTTP session event SE. The session created method is triggered when a new session is created. The session destroyed method is triggered when a session is destroyed. We can destroy the session by explicitly calling the invalidate method on the session object. Otherwise, the elapsed time since the last client access exceeds the session timeout, the session automatically destroys. These two methods take an HTTP session event as an argument. The javax.servlet.http.http session attribute listener interface allows a listener class to receive the notifications from the web container if we made any changes in the attributes of the session object in the web application. Let's take a look at the methods in this interface. Attribute added. It will notify the listener class when an attribute is added to the session object. Attribute removed. This method will notify when an attribute is removed from the session object. Attribute replaced. It will also notify when an attribute is replaced by the session object. The javax.servlet.http.http session binding listener interface allows a listener class to receive the notifications from the web container if we bind or unbind the objects from the session. Let's take a look at the methods in the interfaces. Value bound. This method will notify the listener class when an object is bounded to the session object. Value unbound. This method will notify when an object is unbounded from the session object. The javax.servlet.http.http session activation listener interface allows a listener class to receive the notifications from the web container about the changes in the state of the session object. Let's see the methods in this interface. Public void session did activate HTTP session event SE. It notifies the listener class about the activation of a session in the web application. Public void session will passivate HTTP session event SE. This method notifies the listener class about the passivation or deactivation of a session in the web application. Till now, we have seen the various methods in the listener interface that handle the session events. Sample application using Java.EE. So far we have discussed the concepts of Java.EE, JDBC, Java Servlet, and JSP. Here in this lesson we will create a sample application in which we used all these concepts. Let's get in to analyze our application Login Validation. The main use of our application is to register the user information and to check the validity of the login information entered by the user. Let's have a glance about what our application will do. In the login page, we have to enter your username and password. The verification of the login information is written in the servlet. If the entered password was correct, it should show you the welcome page. Otherwise, it will show you the message invalid ID or password, try again. In this application, we use MySQL database to store our employee details. Well, let's look at the programs involved on our application. They are login_page.jsp, welcome_page.jsp, error_page.jsp, and loginvalidator.java. Let's analyze the source codes of our application one by one. Here are the codes for login_page.jsp. In this program, we used an HTML form to pass our parameters to the servlet. This form has 4 input elements. They are 2 input text fields, username and password, and 2 buttons. They are Submit and Clear. The form tag has 2 parameters, i.e. method and action. We are using the post HTTP request, so the method name is post and the next attribute. The action has the address of the target servlet loginvalidator.java, which is going to validate the login details. Whenever we click the login button, the parameters will be passed to our servlet. When we click the clear button, it resets all the fields in the form. Well, here are the codes for the login validator servlet. Here first we imported a few packages. The first 2 packages are imported to write the servlet, the third package to perform input-output functions, and the final package is for database operations. Login validator is the servlet name that extends the HTTP servlet class, and we override the doPost method because we are going to retrieve the parameters using the post request. The next set of code describes loading the driver and getting a connection for MySQL database using JDBC. We load the driver for MySQL database. Next, we get a connection using getConnection method of the driver manager class by giving the URL. Here, wings is the database name, and we also give a username root and password admin to access the database. Then we create a statement to query the database. In this servlet, we retrieve the username and password using the getParameter method from the request and store it in a string object. We store our login information in the employee detail table as we discussed earlier. We got the password from the database using the query by giving the username that we got from the request parameter and storing it in a string object. Then we verify the retrieved password with the password we got from the request parameter using the equals method. If the password is correct, then it invokes the welcome page. Otherwise, it shows an error page. Here also, we used the request dispatcher to forward to the target page. We used try and catch blocks to catch the exception while loading a class or while getting a connection, etc. We have to close all the statements, result set and connection properly, so they must be defined in the finally method. Well, let's look at the codes now for the welcome_page.jsp. Here it is. In this page, we just display a welcome message when the login is correct. We can choose some stylish font and colors to display our message. Here are the codes for error_page.jsp. This page is the same as the login page with the addition of error message. We add the message invalid ID or password, try again, to show the login name or password was incorrect. So we just add the error message in the body of the program. As a result, it displays the error message and the login form if any of the user information was wrong. Until now, we analyzed the codes. Here, we didn't discuss about the web server and how we can deploy applications in that server. We will discuss it in the next lesson. Now let's execute our programs to look at the output. Type the path corresponding to the login page in the browser and press Enter. Enter the correct login and password and click Login button. This will show you the welcome page of our site. Now, go back to the login page. This time give the same username but the wrong password. As a result, it will show you the error page, which displays the message invalid ID or password, try again. Now, I am confident that you have a basic idea about the usage of servlets, JDBC, and JSP in the real-world applications. Power of JSP in the real world. So far, we have discussed the various concepts in JSP and its functions, and also how good it is when JSP is compared to other competing and alternative technologies. I already told you that JSP is used mainly for web application development. Here, we see some of the real-time examples in the world where we are using JSP. JSPs are used in websites of several sectors. I will show you some of them now. Airlines, financial services, sports, retail, entertainment, military and federal government, search engine and portals, and travel sites, etc. If you take the airline sector, the websites of some of the major leaders are using the JSP for his web page design. They are Delta Airlines, Saudi Arabian Airlines, British Airways, Air China, and American Airlines. Then, if you take the financial services sector, I will show you some of the leaders using JSP for their web page design. American Century Investments, Fidelity, New York Stock Exchange, First USA Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, Bank of America, Construction Bank. Likewise, if we take sectors, we have many of the major leaders using JSP in their websites. These sectors, I will give you the direct links for some of the major websites. They are visualthesaurus.com, oceanatlas.org, europal.europa.eu, artima.com, semantic.com, cityrail.info, reebok.com. Now we are looking at a screenshot of websites using JSP. In the screenshot, you are seeing the websites of Warner Brothers Pictures, Delta Airlines and Saudi Airlines, US Army, US Homeland Security, and Bank of America. Now I am confident that you know the power of JSP in the real world.